back. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here for another session of White Feather Council of Men podcast that is sponsored by the Trinity Episcopal Church in Charlottesville, Virginia. We have a very exciting session for us tonight. We have the co-founders of an organization, a hospitality organization, nonprofit in Charlotte, North Carolina. They are Helms, Jarrell, and Greg Jarrell. I will say that Helms, Jarrell does have a girl name associated with that at some point. Her name is Jennifer, but everybody knows her as Helms. So this is Helms and Greg Jarrell. And I know them from 20 or 25 years ago when I was on the staff at a seminary in Richmond, Virginia called BTSR, Baptist Theological Seminary at Richmond. And they were these wide-eyed, idealistic students that came in to change the world. And what I'll say about them is that they have. It's amazing what they've done. They are two people who I would call heroes of my life. They may not know that word associated with them. I remember them telling me their story a long time ago of how they had a vision of establishing this community in an inner city somewhere. And I thought, yeah, go for it. And I just knew that it would never happen just because they were so wide-eyed at that point and didn't know the realism about the world. But they've made it happen. And it's incredible what they've done. So they're not just idealistic, but they're doing it. And I just respect the heck out of them for what they've done and who they are. They are both so creative. Helms is an artist and does a lot of programming around artistic development and work. They're very creative with the programming that they develop and what they offer the community. Greg is a musician and is an author. In fact, Greg was interviewed earlier on another session of this podcast. So if you haven't already caught that one, you need to catch it. He has written a book that will be published in February. But this session is about their work with the QC Family Tree nonprofit organization. And thanks, Helms and Jarrell, for being here. I'll let y'all say hello real quickly first, and then I'll start with the first question. Okay. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, we're glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. Excited to be with you and to have a chance to meet Philip tonight.
Yeah, it's great to have Philip with us, the co-host, and it's great to reconnect with former folks of many years ago that I respect and appreciate. Let's jump right into it if you don't mind. I'd like for you to just tell our listeners what your organization is about and sort of just maybe how it developed, major efforts you're involved in, maybe the opportunities and programs offered. What do you do where you do it?
Sure. Okay. QC Family Tree. QC is short for Queen City. Charlotte is known as the Queen City for Queen Charlotte. And so that kind of helps to understand where we are. We're on Catawba land, sugary land in Charlotte, North Carolina, on the west side of Charlotte. And we moved here to start this kind of work in August of 2005. And at the time, we were interested in looking towards moving into a neighborhood that was experiencing poverty, because we one of the tenets of our faith is the Beatitudes, and there's a part of the ancient scripture that says, "Blessed are the poor, for they will inherit the kingdom of God." So we felt like if we wanted to know about the kingdom of God, we needed to be in and among the poor. So that brought us to our neighborhood with several other research moments and thinking through moments. And we've been in this neighborhood ever since. QC Family Tree started out as an intentional community. We shared a household and a bank account and all those things with some other folks. And we offered hospitality in our home for people who were experiencing homelessness or transition, with the idea that we weren't exactly sure what what we were in for, but we felt like that was what we could do to embody what we believed. So then over the course of time, being planted in the neighborhood and making relationships with people, we tried to respond to what the gifts were of the community and also what the needs are of the community. And our work has been informed by neighborhood assets and neighborhood needs.
So now we work along two branches. One of them, we call ourselves cultural organizers. We work as cultural workers and community organizers, sort of fused in that way. So we heard a trainer a couple of weeks ago from the Racial Equity Institute use the phrase, culture eats policy for lunch.
Oh gosh.
So if we're going to change the course that we're on, then we have to do the work of changing the culture that we live inside that helps us to reproduce the results of inequality, of racial oppression, of the destruction of bodies and neighborhoods for the sake of white supremacy and for the sake of capitalism and money and greed and avarice. And so we have to work on that culture. And so we organize against racism using the tools of culture, whether that's storytelling, visual arts, music, and our organization helps to support artists, especially Black artists who are doing that kind of justice work. The other piece for us is affordable housing. Our neighborhood has experienced long-term disinvestment up until just a few years ago. And so before the prices shot up around here, we were given some houses that people didn't want anymore. And we were able to purchase a couple out from a couple of bad landlords. And so we now manage 8 house units, some apartments, some single family houses that are held as long-term affordable housing. Our rents here in the neighborhood generally are $1,000 to $1,500 for a 2-bedroom apartment. We hold the rents around $550 to help folks who are facing displacement to be here and to be stable. And so a lot of our cultural work works on housing policy, housing conceptions, because that issue is kind of basic to meeting people's material needs.
Wow. Well, it sounds like challenging work and takes true calling to be invested in that. We're going to talk a lot of this session on the aspects of racism, racial justice or injustice, racial reconciliation. But before we dive right into that, Phil, do you have any follow-up questions to this beginning part?
Just a question just based on what Greg just shared. Do you find support or lack of support from the local leadership or government there in Charlotte with regard to the work that you're doing?
It shifts over time. When we were doing a lot of youth leadership development, we had a lot of church support at that time. And I think this speaks to some of the ideas around white saviorism, anti-racism, in that we had a lot of our imagery, the things that we had, pictures of young Black kids being helped by white folks. And so we received lots of contributions at that time. When we shifted our work more towards a little bit more rooted, more getting at the cause, not that we're not doing direct services and those kinds of things, but when we shifted our work and we didn't have that same kind of look, our funding has reduced, but it's also reduced in the middle of an economic kind of turn down. So it's hard to tell, is there a 1-for-1? And then in our local government, QC Family Tree we have often done things sort of off the radar and out of the box. And so a lot of times you have to prove to government people that you can make a win, or that you can prove yourself to be a viable option. And we're moving in that direction, but we haven't been able to necessarily prove with the matrix and the metrics that the government might want.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned out of the box. You've always been out of the box people. I knew you as students as being out of the box people, and that's what drew me to you, of course.
Yeah.
But in relation to that, where did you? I'm interested again, right before we get into all the racism aspects of what this conversation is really about. I'm interested in what drew you, or how you chose this neighborhood, or how the neighborhood chose you, and maybe its influence in your work, and maybe just some about being located um, in that specific neighborhood that you are. Did you ever feel out of the box there, or yeah, something about that aspect?
Sure. When we moved here with a handful of friends, we had met a couple of folks locally who kind of pointed us in the general direction of West Charlotte, which a former mayor called the catchment area of urban renewal, meaning that blockbusting and the whole series of injustices had white flight had happened here, and so there's a whole district of Black neighborhoods that had experienced long-term disinvestment. And so we started looking around. We drove through every neighborhood on the west side. We were attracted to this one for a couple of reasons. We met some cool people here while we were looking around. This neighborhood was a little more middle class when it was built, and so it had houses that were large enough to fit two couples and still have space for hospitality. So some of it was just a very practical kind of decision. So that's how we wound up landing here.
Well, that's great. I do want to switch. A lot of this conversation, as you may know on this podcast, is about racial reconciliation, racial division, how we can overcome racial inequities, moving toward racial justice, dealing with issues of white supremacy, those kinds of things. So in thinking about all of that, race, racism, the healing that needs to be done, and your work, huge question out there is maybe what successes have you had in programming or relationships, and maybe what difficulties and challenges have you faced? So in a sense, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what are you doing there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, it's easy to start with what hasn't worked.
Okay.
I feel like when we came, we were naive and romanticized a lot of different things, and had, we were just gonna try all the things, and that was wonderful and good energy, but it also resulted in a good bit of colonizing the neighborhood, or colonizing the work we were doing, or trying to rein in people's behaviors based on what we valued rather than the cultural values of the neighborhood, those kinds of things. And we had to learn our way out of that. And that took quite a bit of time and a lot of work. And then there's also some wrestling that happens with, okay, so we're starting to unravel ourselves from white supremacy culture and racism, and we're working towards anti-racism, and also all of that is so enmeshed with capitalism that it begins to be really confusing, because we went for example, we attended and were members of a Black Baptist congregation here in town, and we were starting to think about economic downward mobility. We wanted to be more like Christ. We wanted to be among the poor, and in the church they were talking a lot about upward mobility of the Black community, and how to carry both things at the same time, and figure out what that meant for us, what that meant for our neighbors, what that meant for the youth group that we were trying to mentor and develop into leaders. What kind of goals do we work together towards? And so that was one space where it's kind of in the middle still, wrestling of what you do with that. I think some success that we've had is that we have found ways over time to give away a lot of our the power that we have in things such as titles, keys, space for people to use, salaries, and those kinds of things. And so we've been able to kind of take ourselves out of the picture of like the primary leadership of QC Family Tree. We now share that, or the primary leadership of some of our programming. Now, people of color who are in the neighborhood, who are rooted, who have been here a long time, or who are more heavily impacted by the inequity that we're trying to address, are leading the programs and the goals and those kinds of things. And that's been something that we've had to work out over time, and had like, existential crisis. What does it mean if I'm not the leader? All those kinds of things we've had to kind of talk our way through.
One other success that we've had that I always try to lift up is just working in coalition across neighborhoods. In the establishment of an organization that's now called the West Side Community Land Trust. The Community Land Trust is a strategy to create long-term or permanently affordable housing. And so with our living room filled up one night for a meeting, we had 35 or 40 people crammed in the living room for this organizing meeting across multiple neighborhoods. Wow. And the long-term fruit of that meeting turned into the founding of Westside Community Land Trust. It took us years of slow and patient work across race and class and across neighborhoods, but building this coalition. And several years later, after the formal establishment of that, we now have dozens of houses that are in process with that Community Land Trust, as well as a senior development that's currently under construction, building 120 long-term affordable senior housing units. So that's been a huge success. It's not ours, but we were part of it. And so working in those sorts of coalitions has been really, really good success for us.
Wow. It's just, I can't, it's hard for me to separate the work that you're doing in regard to, I can go back a little bit, because when Warren first started describing the two of you to me back when you guys went to seminary together, and being able to talk then about work you wanted to do that you're doing now. And it just goes right back to Jeremiah 29:11. That was planted. That was planted. And it's just wonderful to see that you started having the vision way back when you was in seminary, and you're doing this wonderful work. Just like when Jesus was talking to the rich man and he told him to go sell everything and go and help and interact with the poor. That's the work that you're doing. This is just so wonderful to just meet you and know that what you're doing in regard to the challenges that you may face, but you still go forth and do that. And when you talk about gaining trust in a community that has been labeled with poverty and crime and all of that stuff, how has that worked? When you can put a face or put a label on a feeling of, you have gained that sense of trust. Because I know at some point it probably was difficult, but you continue to made yourself a present. And I would assume trust has to be centered for a lot of the families that you interact with.
Yeah, you're right. And at the beginning, people used to say like, well, how are people receiving you? And I'm like, oh, we're fine. Like no one sees anything different about us. And I really did believe that. I didn't really get a overt sense that we were being rejected in any kind of way. And over the course of time, though, I began to see that there was like a mask that people had on when they were around us. There was a lot of code switching. And you could tell that people were changing the way that they were talking, changing the way they were holding themselves because they were talking to us as white folks. And also as Christians, we got, in fact, our first label that I heard from a neighbor was, y'all are the Christians. And didn't hear really white until a little bit later, which, in a lot of circles, Christian is code for white. So could have just been saying it without saying it. And so, but I think at that point we were making a lot of mistakes about how to build trust. we were, I mean, I told the story the other day that we were running around just grabbing children off the street, assuming that they were not taken care of and inviting them over for meals and stuff like that. And one time I went over to the basketball gym, the community center, to tell everybody we had some extra food, come get some food. And when they came all over and ate lunch, and then they went back to the gym, and when they got back to the gym, somebody's mama came storming through that gym, and she let me have it. And rightly so. I took her child out of supervision where she knew that they were. And so there was a lot of mishaps and a lot of kind of having to make up for it, tuck your tail and be humble and learn differently than what you did before. So that's a big part of trust building, I think. And then longevity. I mean, we've been here for a long time. And when we did at some points kind of take in teenagers who needed kind of a pseudo foster care moment, a family member could take them in, and that was us. And they're fighting and punching things and slamming doors, and we don't even have kids yet, so this is not our lifestyle. And then just still remaining there and keeping the door open, and people stealing things, and we still remain there and keep the door open, and all these kinds of things I think over time have shown that we're trustworthy.
Sure.
So how do you move towards, final question for me, how do you, as far as what's needed next, as far as reconciliation, some sense of racial harmony, what do you think is needed to try to move that needle some?
I mean, for Helms and I, as white folks who've had now the life experience that we've had, the significant motion of the next chapter for us is speaking to our own people. Right. So we have some street cred. You might say, when we walk into the white sanctuaries that we occasionally get invited to, or the fellowship halls, or the Sunday school classes, or the Rotary Club, or whatever, we have a set of experiences that is 100% foreign to white folks, right? And so the next piece of our work, continuing the affordable housing work, right? Continuing the community organizing here, but also doing the organizing in what's sort of naturally our communities of birth, the white communities that we came from, to go back and say, look, we've been doing this wrong all along. And we've been forming one another into this system that kills and destroys, and we have to do better. And not everybody gets the opportunity to say that. And when we say it, then people have to listen to us a little bit differently because of where we're coming from and where we've been, right? So we have to take that responsibility really seriously.
I think the other thing that I still try to keep doing is to what bit of privilege or access or resources that I can gain access to, I try to give away as quickly as possible. So this is small. Like, for example, I wanted to arrange a photography workshop for my kids, and when I did, I made sure to work it out to where it could be for not just my kids, but other people's children too, and try to work that out, or finding grant money that I can apply for through my name, but then distribute it to other people, trying to keep doing that kind of work, because I think that's really important. It helps to form me, and it helps me to kind of utilize the white privilege I have to distribute among other people. And then so far as the place of challenge that I'm still trying to figure out is how can we be about reparation in real actual terms and not just in conversation? What does that mean? And then thinking through important questions like, what's the difference between federal reparation and just your own kind of personal ways of repairing harm? So those are some things that I'm being challenged by right now as well.
And are speaking specifically to that, are there efforts that you're involved in, conversations, groups, Charlotte-wide efforts that link into that? Because to be honest, I'm struggling with the same word and
Mhm.
aspect, because some believers in racial justice don't really believe that reparation is, the best way to go about it, and some might be offended. Even those that would get repaired, they would say, yeah, this is either not enough or it's not right. Are
Right.
there efforts that you're already centered in that are helping, that you could help guide any listeners to, or are you just sort of feeling it out?
Well, QC Family Tree led a fall series this past fall, and the last workshop of that series was on reparation. And Shemaye Haynes, the co-director of QC Family Tree, led that conversation. She is affiliated with NCOBRA, which is like a longtime activist organizing group that has been working towards federal reparation. And one of
Okay.
the things they've been talking about is that it's really important to be thinking differently. Like, reparation is not all these things. It's not like a group of people feels bad and they put some money in an account for somebody. It is federal reparation, is that the nation pays reparation. And that's really important to distinguish, because if a small group of people decide to do something, that's wonderful and good, but it doesn't repair all of the harm. And so having different language for different kinds of repairing the harm is, I think, very helpful. At a church that we're
Yeah.
affiliated here in town, Caldwell Presbyterian, they have, it's an integrated, racially integrated church, and they have been for their almost 30 years or so, or I don't know, 20 for sure, been using songs from the African American tradition, a lot of spirituals, a lot of songs from the African American hymnal. And so they've been thinking through, what can they do in terms of reparation around those, using these songs in a primarily white yet still integrated racially setting. Are there some ways that they can think through almost paying like royalties to the Black community for utilizing that music? And so what they are doing right now is that they're taking up, when they take up their offering every week, there's a way that people can give an offering toward this fund. And then what they've chosen to do with the money that is being donated for reparation for the use of the music is to donate it to a Black-led music organization in town that helps to train young people to be musicians or to learn music or those kinds of things. And so that's a church-oriented project that we know about and are kind of akin to.
Yeah, but those are two very practical things. I was trying to get beyond. There are a lot of groups that are doing statements of sorrow or statements of non-guilt, that go back to, yeah, we're white and we're sorry for slavery and therefore we'll do what we can, but they never do anything. They just say that they want to do it. I think they mean well, but that's what I meant. Where is it hitting the road? I have a couple of things that you all mentioned your words, so I want to follow up on. You didn't use the word directly, Helms, unlearn, but you used something like that early on when you had to learn something new. But I heard the words, you had to unlearn something about what you brought into that neighborhood. Can you express that a little bit more?
Yeah. I think I had to unlearn a lot of things about how to mentor youth in a way that is not like making them be middle-class white people. I mean, I came from middle-class whiteness. And so the way that I knew to do youth ministry, I mean, it was taught how to do youth ministry was all in that way. And so had to kind of unlearn those types of values and recognize that I was placing them on other people without their consent. And so that's one thing that we had to unlearn. I think another is that, and we're still trying to figure this out now, is that if liberation is really actually going to happen, then the people who are most impacted by the work have to be doing the work, the act of liberation. And so that because I'm real good at like taking charge and doing all the things and over functioning and like finding the deal for somebody else and so having to make sure I'm getting out of the way so that that person can move themselves forward in collaboration with other people is something that I also had to unlearn.
Okay. And Greg, the phrase that struck me from your conversation was when you went into these groups to speak, you had experiences that were foreign to them. What was that, a negative or a positive? Was it abrasive to them, or was it warm, or was it both and? I mean, with because it can be both. With experiences so foreign, did they sort of run from it, or did they sort of gravitate toward it?
I mean, I guess people react differently, but a lot of people, I mean, I take it that most people are of relatively goodwill. And so often, we'll get questions that are naive or that show that people haven't been doing their homework. They haven't read their James Baldwin, haven't listened to Abby Lincoln and Nina Simone, right? They haven't been doing what they need to be doing. But they're asked from a place of like a good heart.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's necessarily abrasive so much as it is. Sometimes it's posed to us in terms of admiration. Like, I so admire your bravery, or something like this, right?
Mhm.
And to which my response is like, there's not like these are people.
Yeah.
My neighbors are people. The suburbs scare me more than the neighborhood that I live in. But it's like but to approach that folks who are asking those questions, presupposing their goodwill, and to say, yeah, I do have this different experience. Let me help you to unlearn some of the things that I've had to unlearn. Let me offer you a different frame and some resources to help support that frame, to help you see the world differently.
Okay. Thanks for helping us understand your work better in QC. I think Phil is going to maybe ask another question or two, and I think he's going to wrap us up.
Yeah, I just when Greg said that, it's like I think one of the common traps or behaviors or I don't know imprisonment that we have had in America is fear. This fear of the unknown, fear of yeah, it's just fear seems to just keeps us separated and but I have hope, and this is so great meeting the two of you because it just instills that sense of I love the work that you're doing in reference to John Meacham. He always talks about the better angels among us, and when I met Warren and when he was sharing with me his life story, I tagged him a better angel. And I got two more.
Don't say that, because Helms and Greg wouldn't label me as an angel. So please don't.
Disagree.
He's got some good stories, but it's just I just think it's and I think what John Meacham was making reference to in regard to that term, better angels, that it is people like the two of you that go about doing what you've been called to do, and you do it with a sense of commitment and courage. Um, that you may face challenges, but you still keep moving and doing what you feel is good. And I my wife calls me an optimistic person because I think in view of all of the challenges we have as a country and people that make a lot of noise, there are those that just go about doing good work, not getting a lot of attention, but just keep doing what you're doing. And that gives me hope. And just having the opportunity to meet the two of you and listen to your work, the mission that you've been given, the task that you've been given, you take it on. And as you say, others may look at you and be marvel at you, or they uncomfortable with it in your presence, but they still know what you're doing. They feel that, and I just wanted to just share that with you. I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to meet you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Phil.
Yeah. So we will end this session at this time. We hope that something that's been said by Helms and Greg that would inspire those that took the opportunity to view this podcast. It is probably one of the most important podcasts that Juan and I have done to this date, and I'm sure that I would probably go back and look at it myself again because I'm sure I missed something that I want to be able to share with other people in person, um, or in a future podcast. But we thank you so much for joining us, and we're so pleased that the Hams and Greg took the time to be with us and not find it robbery of their personal time to join Juan and I. And I just love this relationship, man, that you guys have had with Juan since all three of you were young, bright, with all of the ideas to heal the world, and you're doing a good job at it. Good job. So pleased to have you as our guest tonight, and thank you so much. So we'd like for you guys to share your closing comments, and then we'll say good night.
All right. Well, y'all come see us. Come on down to Charlotte, get the grand tour, stay a while, and you can follow QC Family Tree stuff on Instagram. It's at QC Family Tree or qcfamilytree.org. And then we both have our own artist websites as well. Mine is helmsjarrell.com and Greg's is gregjarrell.com. So people can find us there too with the other cultural work that we do.
Good.
And Greg, do you have a blog going on new as well?
Yeah, I use a platform called Substack, so you can just search for me on Substack, and mostly about the book that I've been working on, that will be out in February.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks, you too. It's been a pleasure talking with you about your great work there in Charlotte, and all of you listeners. They would also accept any donations to help carry on the work of their great work, all their efforts there, and it's a great work to support. And I appreciate your work there in the presence of a lot of folks and a place that not many people would choose. So thank you for choosing it, and thank you for what you do for the work of us. Phil, do you want to tune us out?
Yes. Okay. So we thank you. We thank everyone. Definitely again. I can't say it enough. We thank Hams and Greg for taking the time to share with us this evening. And I'm just filled with it's just been wonderful to have this opportunity to be with them. And we look forward to having our guests to join us on our next session. And if you want to follow up with any comments, you can just reach us through our email at wfcounselomen@gmail.com. So we like to go out at this time. We say good night. Thank you so much.
Good night, all.
Thank you.